Hi guys, so we're going to start our World War II unit, and we're going to start by talking about the rise of dictators because there are several dictators that play a huge role in the war and kind of leading to the war. So before we get started, I wanted to show you guys this picture. So this is a picture from Germany after World War I, before World War II, so in like the 20s and 30s. And these children are playing with marks, which was the German currency. So that's like they're playing with dollar bills essentially. So they're playing with cash. So just looking at that picture, what does it tell you about the value of the mark? So imagine, your parents probably don't let you just go out and play with, stacks of cash like that. A lot of people have never seen that amount of cash physically in their hands before in their lives. So it shows you, that the value of the mark back then was actually very, very low, that it was not worth a lot at all. Because if it was worth a lot, they wouldn't be outside playing with them. So how did this happen? Okay, so we have to kind of think back to the Great Depression. So the Great Depression didn't just happen in the United States. It actually happened all over the world. And Germany was one of those countries that got hit the hardest by the Depression because they were struggling after World War I. So they didn't just struggle throughout the 1930s like the Americans did. Germany was struggling immediately following World War I throughout the 20s, because they were paying for the war. They got a lot of stuff taken away from them in the Versailles Treaty. And then, of course, the Depression hits and made everything worse. So the people in Germany probably felt pretty upset, pretty dejected, probably desperate, wanted somebody to come in and kind of save the day. And that's how we kind of set up the Nazis taking over in Germany, because they came in and said, we are going to fix this situation. We're going to make money worth more. We're going to get out of the Depression. We're going to, restore, German power in the world. And a lot of German people really appreciated that and wanted that. So like I said, we're going to talk about the rise of the dictators that played a role in World War II here. So we're going to start with Spain. Okay, so Spain was led by a guy named General Francisco Franco. He was a part of the Falange, or fascist party. And he was able to come to power in a civil war with German and Italian help. And he actually is neutral in World War II, but he is on the side of Germany and Italy if he were to join. Now, there was a civil war in Spain, okay, and the Germans and the Italians came in and they helped Francisco Franco. So it was the fascists versus the non-fascists. So we have to think, why would Germany and Italy help in a civil war with Spain? So remember, a civil war is a country within is a war within a single country. So America's Civil War were Americans fighting against Americans, the North versus the South. In Spain, the Civil War is the same idea. It was one group of Spanish people fighting against another group of Spanish people. So you have to think to yourself, why would Germany and Italy get involved in a civil war that didn't really have much to do with either of their countries? And we have to realize that Germany and Italy were also fascist countries, because at that point Hitler had taken over and the Nazis were in power, and a guy named Benito Mussolini was in power in Italy. So they, of course, wanted another fascist to take power in Spain. So that's why they got involved, because they wanted to spread fascism. They wanted another dictator. They wanted another fascist dictator specifically, so that they could be a potential ally if, war to come later on. This is a quote by Francisco Franco. He says, "We do not believe in government through the voting booth. Spain has no foolish dreams." So it just shows that he was a dictator, meaning he did not give the people of Spain a voice or a say in the government. There was no voting. There were no elections. He was the leader, and that was it. Next guy we're going to talk about is from Italy. Okay, Benito Mussolini. They also called him Il Duce. He is the leader of the fascist party in Italy, and he was the first fascist dictator in, the history of the world. He was the first one to really come up with fascism. And, fascism is this idea that you are to put the country above all else. You're not supposed to think as an individual. You're supposed to do what the government says when the government says it. and you're supposed to be happy about it because that will help, the country. That's the idea. And Benito Mussolini kind of took that to the extreme in Italy. So he was a dictator and he controlled every aspect of life in Italy. Now, when he rose to power, the way he rose to power is that he would give speeches and he would go around and he'd have these rallies. And in those rallies, he would promise to revive the economy. Because again, you have to remember the whole world is struggling in the 20s and 30s to get through the Great Depression. So he's promising to revive the economy, get the money back into Italy. And he also is going to restore the glory of the Roman Empire. So remember, if you think back, probably when you guys were in like 7th grade, you probably did world history with the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks and things. Well, the ancient Roman Empire is one of the greatest empires in the history of the world. And that was in, Italy. Rome is in Italy. So Benito Mussolini promised to bring them back to that power and that glory that the Romans had brought to Italy and the Italian people. So a lot of people were supportive of that. When he gets involved in World War II, he is going to be allies with Hitler, and he ends up invading Ethiopia and Albania. So those are areas in Africa, actually. So there was fighting in northern Africa, and he went there because it's actually pretty close to Italy. So if you were to look at a map of the world, Italy is just right above Africa. So it was a quick jump for him down there to invade, and that's the territory that he wanted because he didn't want to step on Hitler's toes and try to take over Europe because Hitler was taking over Europe. So Mussolini was helping out by going into Africa. Here's a quote from Mussolini. He said, "Let us have a dagger between our teeth, a bomb in our hands, and infinite scorn in our hearts." So he was a no-nonsense kind of guy, very, very militaristic, and ran Italy kind of like a military with this fascist government. Next one's probably the most famous, or the one that you've heard of most, is Adolf Hitler. He was the Führer of Germany, or the leader of Germany. He led the Nazi Party, and the Nazi Party is like a fascist party or fascist group. So we consider him a fascist dictator. The way that he rose to power is he actually blamed the fire in the Reichstag on communists. So there was this struggle in Germany in the 20s of groups to take over. The communists wanted to take over and the Nazis wanted to take over. So they were kind of battling it out, trying to get more influence than the other. So there was a fire in the Reichstag, which is the kind of like our Capitol building that we have here in the United States. So it was a very high up government building in Germany, and it got caught on fire and was destroyed. Well, Hitler and the Nazis come along and they're like, see, the communists did that. They're burning your buildings to the ground, and it made a lot of people hate the communists. And when the people started to hate the communists, they turned to the Nazis and they started to support the Nazis. Hitler also, to get support, said that he was going to get rid of the Treaty of Versailles. So you have to think back to World War I when we were talking about the Treaty of Versailles and how it took away Germany's military, made them take complete blame for the war. They had to pay back reparations, which is a lot of money, which put them in debt. And Adolf Hitler comes along and he's saying, we're throwing that out the window and we're going to get back our power, our military, our money, and we're going to, become great again. And a lot of people supported that. Now, another way that he gained support was he actually used the Jewish people as scapegoats. So he published his book called Mein Kampf. He actually wrote it when he was in jail. And he basically blamed all of the problems on the Jewish people. So all the problems that were going on in Germany and around the world, Hitler says the Jews were the ones who started all of those or caused all those problems and were making them worse. So he was going to take care of that situation. You guys probably know how he eventually did take care of the situation was when we get the Holocaust, which we'll talk about in about a week here. So before the war actually starts, World War II actually starts, he ends up taking areas called the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, and Czechoslovakia. So the Rhineland is an area near France along Germany and France's border that was supposed to be a non-military zone according to the Treaty of Versailles. So he went and he took that first and nothing really happened. So then he goes into the Sudetenland, which is kind of south of Germany and Europe, and he took the Sudetenland and nothing really happened. Nobody really stopped him. So then he went so far as to take all of Czechoslovakia, which is a country south of Germany and Europe as well. And that was eventually what caused World War II, because he started taking all of this stuff And eventually the British and the French were like, you probably shouldn't keep taking over countries in Europe. So they ended up declaring war. But we will get more into that in a couple days. Here's a quote from Adolf Hitler. It says, "Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it." So he was very manipulative. These are just some pictures from his rallies to show, like how big and over the top they were when it came to, his speeches and things. This next guy is actually kind of unique because, yes, he is a dictator, but he was actually on the United States' side in the war. So he was an ally to France, Great Britain, and the United States during World War II. So he's the only dictator that was an ally to the United States. And it was led by, or the Soviet Union was led by Joseph Stalin. He was known as the Man of Steel. And he was the only communist dictator that really got involved in the war as well. So remember, communism is when the state controls everything or the government controls everything. There's no private businesses. There's no private ownership. Everything is given to the government, and the government is supposed to dish out, equally to the people. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't usually work out like that, and it ends up, causing a lot of poverty and, a lot of issues. But that was the idea. So he is a communist. Remember, the Soviet Union is Russia, essentially. So once Russia became communist, they changed their name to the Soviet Union. You might also see it called the USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, all talking about the same country, which is essentially Russia. But while they're communists, they go by those other names. So the way that Stalin came to power, he eliminated all competition after Lenin's death. So Lenin was the original communist dictator in the Soviet Union when they became communists. Lenin dies, so then Stalin is able to rise through the ranks in the Communist Party, and he becomes the leader of the party. And when it says eliminates all competition, like literally eliminate. Like he has more deaths on his hands than even Hitler does. Like Stalin was no joke. He would have people like mysteriously disappear into Siberia or go to these, work camps in different parts of Russia and things. And there were a lot of executions under Stalin's rule as well. So he was no joke, that's for sure. He was actually pretty popular, though, in Russia for, within reason, because he did industrialize the country. So he used these 5-year plans to industrialize. So he put together these plans that every 5 years they would become better and better with industrialization. So instead of being an agrarian kind of farming society in the Soviet Union, he industrialized them, made them a manufacturing and updated technology, and kind of brought them up to date with the rest of the world. Now, initially, Stalin ends up signing a non-aggression pact with Germany. So he starts out in the beginning of the conflict as allies with Germany. And when he's allies with Germany, he invades Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And he even invades Poland with Hitler himself at the start of the war. And that's what officially starts the war. Well, eventually, Hitler turns around and kind of stabs Stalin in the back and ends up invading Russia. So when that happens, Joseph Stalin ends up switching sides, and that's how he becomes allies with England, France, and eventually the United States. So it's kind of weird that 3 democracies, England, France, and the US, would join ranks with a communist dictator, but they had a common enemy, and that's what kind of united them. They all wanted to defeat Hitler. So that's how he kind of ends up as the oddball out on the Allies side. Here's a quote from Stalin. He said, "Ideas are more powerful than guns. We would not let our enemies have guns. Why should we let them have ideas?" So he was not really very open to letting people think. So books were destroyed. Intellectuals, so like professors, people with degrees, doctors, they were kind of eliminated. He really wanted to have total control over the people in the Soviet Union. Last one we're going to talk about is Japan. Okay, so they were led by General Hideki Tojo and Emperor Hirohito. So they technically had an emperor, but the emperor was really there just for show. He didn't really make any of the decisions. The guy who made the decision was Hideki Tojo. So the philosophy or the type of government or party that they had in Japan is that they were called militarists, which just basically means that the military controlled the government and controlled the country. So since General Hideki Tojo was the leader of the military, meant he was essentially leader of the whole country of Japan. He eventually becomes prime minister, and the militarists just end up controlling the country. So there's still an emperor, but he just kind of sits there and looks pretty. He doesn't make a lot of the decisions. He does pretty much whatever Tojo tells him to do. So Japan, early on, before they attack the United States at Pearl Harbor in 1941, they actually start invading China, which is right beside Japan. So an area in China, northern China, is called Manchuria, had a lot of iron and coal. Well, you have to think Japan's an island, meaning they're completely surrounded by water. And the only way to get off of an island is by boat or by airplane. Well, to use either of those, you need a lot of iron and you need a lot of coal. So Japan thought that if they invaded China and took some of that iron and coal, then that would be very helpful for them in their country, especially because they wanted to start taking over other areas of the world, and you need a lot of iron and coal to fight a war. So that's what they did, and that's kind of how America ends up getting involved, because we end up kind of boycotting Japan almost, and we surround them and don't let them. Oh, why can't I think of the word? Oh my gosh, I'm having a total brain fart. Anyways, it'll come to me. But we basically cut off Japan from the rest of the world as punishment for invading China, because we didn't want them to invade China because we trade in China. So we wanted to make sure that they did not get away with taking over all of China. So we cut off their supply to oil, cut off their supply to coal, and that's what kind of prompted the attack at Pearl Harbor. So there was more history to it rather than just Japan woke up one day and we're like, hey, let's go attack the United States at Pearl Harbor. It was something that had been kind of brewing for a while. Tojo has a quote. He says, Emperor Hirohito will believe what we tell him to believe. So again, Emperor Hirohito was just there as like the figurehead. Tojo was the one, and the military were the ones that were really making all of the decisions. All right, so those were the major dictators that were taking over in World War II, or during World War II. All of them were kind of allies except for Joseph Stalin. He would eventually become allies with England, France, and the United States. And we're going to get into tomorrow who those allied leaders were. So who were the leaders of the United States, Great Britain, and France that really played a role in World War II. So if you haven't already, go through and fill in that Google Doc that I attached to Google Classroom, because it's essentially like your notes that go with this PowerPoint here, and get that turned in by the end of the day today. All right, that does it for me. I will see you later.